Well, that's great.
Is that supposed to be oil?
That is not supposed to be green. Yes.
A big shout out to Maxon and Anderson and Everett and Emery for pushing this car from my garage back into the shop. Thank you for your help. The idea here is to get the car underneath the hoist that is hanging from the rafters in the shop. Caleb is at the wheel, so it's his job to make sure that we're well aligned. We are in figure it out mode. We really don't know what to do with this car yet. But after looking through it, we've realized that the first step, regardless of which direction we go, is to get the engine out of the car. We know that the engine is not in good shape. We don't know exactly what or if it really has any major problems. Since it's taken apart as far as it is, our plan is to pull the engine and go from there. Most likely, this engine gets rebuilt, but we recognize full and well that it could be replaced. If the block is bad, we'll do something completely different. If the crank is bad, we'll either go a different direction or maybe we'll stroke this engine.
The main things holding it in, from what I can just see right now, are the engine mounts, the bell housing bolts on the transmission, and the torque converter bolts. So what I want to do is take off some of these accessories so that we have a little bit more room to work, it'll balance a little better.
I had a friend come over who deals in oils and had him take a sample from the transmission fluid. It's not entirely conclusive, but it seems that for the most part, the transmission checks out. It tested high for the silicon levels, so what we'll need to do on the transmission is pull the oil pan out and see if there are any material pieces of metal or debris. This is the bell
I'm just
housing.
trying to muscle with my hand.
Right here.
Yeah.
Okay, this is the back of the engine, front of the transmission. This is the gap between them. We want to pull these bolts out and separate the two, but before we do that, we need to unbolt the torque converter.
Yes.
Wait, why do we have to unbolt the torque converter?
So that you don't make a mess when the torque converter comes off the transmission, because it's full of fluid.
Maxon wants to play the game still.
And it's better
It's way easier to take it off after it's out of the bell housing.
Yeah, but I don't think it'd be worth your time, but if you think so.
I don't think we're gonna make a mess either, because we're gonna keep the engine level.
That's the
Are
idea.
you though?
Right? Ish.
No, you're not.
You know?
Nobody ever keeps the engine level.
Let's just do it just to be safe.
I've never seen it done.
Now the transmission's been sitting long enough that it's hard to know if any of the residue that would manifest is even up in the oil as opposed to settled right down into the pan. That, by the way, is another variable or factor in deciding what we do with the engine, because if the transmission is bad, then either I have to rebuild that or find a reman, or I've got to upgrade it with something. And if I upgrade it with something, you either do an overdrive version of what is in this case a C4 equivalent or swappable, or you made it back to the engine that could potentially go in here along with a newer transmission. A T5, for example, might be kind of fun in here, knowing that we'd have to do some work with clutch and other things, and for the most part those don't even fit underneath the existing body, so we'd have to cut out the sheet metal from the interior, and that job gets kind of big. I'm not opposed to that entirely, but I don't know that I want to go that big just yet. Anyway, we do need to know what's going on with the transmission, but we won't know for sure for a while. The first thing to do is to get the engine out, and so the job here is to get it completely unhooked from the transmission, and then remove the engine mounts, power steering pump, fuel pump. Those things need to get out of the way.
Wait, I have a question about the LS stuff that you were talking about earlier.
Okay.
What makes the LS engine so good that people want to do that?
It's unique because it uses like old school technology. It's still a push rod engine with new technology like fuel injection.
The LS is a push rod?
The LS is a push rod engine.
I did not know that.
I don't even know what that means.
It just means that it isn't overhead cam. Yeah, this thing's not gonna bar.
Wow.
Oh, there it
That
goes.
went. But, oh my gosh, that thing is stiff. I guess that confirms the need to pull the motor anyway. Okay, do it slow for me.
Hey, yo, you're gonna drip on the camera.
It's alright.
It's alright, camera will wash. Okay, now turn it on. I still have
That's
that.
great.
Keep going. Yep, there's the first bolt. The starter is a common access point for torque converter bolts to connect to the flywheel. And so pulling the starter gets us access to those torque converter bolts. Spencer was a little nervous about using ropes. I'm not sure why. They're thick ropes, and frankly, the engine's not that heavy. compare those two push rods.
Oh yeah.
So,
Yeah, Zach, they're my rods.
so Zach, this goes up here. The other end of the push rod goes in that. This is called a rocker.
What are you doing with your engine mount?
It goes like on this thing.
Put it over here.
All right.
So that should go up, right?
Yeah.
Yep, but just like that. And so when this pushes up, because the cam lobe hits it, it
makes
pushes
this
up on
fold
this
up.
and makes the rocker, because it's mounted to the stud on the head, then that pushes on the tip of the valve and opens the valve. The LS uses push rods.
That's right.
Who knew? All right, Zach. Well, why don't you go see what else you can get under there now? That's up an inch or two from where it was. Okay, bell housing bolts.
All right.
Because we're going to keep the engine level.
That's the
Are
idea.
you though?
No, you're not.
You know?
Nobody ever keeps the engine level. I've never seen it done.
Well, I guess there's a first time for everything. We had to find a way to neutralize the weight. So the transmission for a while was sitting on some blocks under the car, and that supported the front of the transmission as we disconnected the engine from it. Then after the engine came out, we needed the transmission to be supported while allowing the car to move. So we simply took some tie down straps and ran from the bell housing bolt holes up to the hinge points on the body of the car, and that held the transmission in place easily, allowing us to slide the car in and out, roll it around, take it down off the jack stands, of course, and be able to move the car around.
How long have you had that cover on?
I got these for Christmas.
Really?
For Caleb. Yeah.
Were they that small before?
Yeah.
Huh.
I like the fit. The baggy fit gets caught on stuff and then you get in trouble.
He's got that European style going on, you know?
Is he getting through?
Yeah, I mean, you want people to see like all the curves and
When you are a man, sometimes you wear stretchy pants.
Done that. And it's full of water.
Whoa.
Well, that's great.
is that supposed to be oil?
That is not supposed to be green. Yes.
From there, we couldn't get after the engine fast enough. We really wanted to tear it down and see what we had. And so while we got the car out of the way, we took some parts off. The engine was terrible, completely full of sludge. When we pulled the oil pan off of the engine, it was still full even after having pulled the drain plug, mostly because of old gasket material that had accumulated in the bottom of the oil pan. The interesting thing was how difficult the lifters were to remove. I haven't done a lot of these, but I was surprised to find just how stuck they were. A couple of them came out without challenge. We started just with like a magnet, by the way, to try to pull the lifters from the top. We went and got some little handled hooks to pull them out. That didn't work either. We then went to the vice grips, which worked on a couple of them, but some of them just broke when we clamped on them and started pulling on them. In the end, to get the lifters out, I first had to remove the crankshaft and all of the connecting rods and pistons, and then from there get the camshaft out, which was also jammed in due to a bad bearing. Then I had an opportunity to reach the lifters from the underside. I could hit them with a punch and a hammer and drive them through. That's how we finally got all of those lifters out. So the engine is now fully disassembled, and it has been put into some different boxes with the pistons numbered, and all of that now is being hauled to the machine shop, where they are going to do a few things. They're going to assess the condition of each of the major parts, and then assuming that each one of those is a usable component, they will go about refurbishing. So the block will get a hot bath, and then it will be bored, and the crank will get ground, and then new pistons will be installed on the connecting rods. We will do the assembly on the engine, and some of the details of what goes on in that assembly will depend on what we decide to do based on the assessment of the parts. So which heads will go on here, we actually don't know yet. For that matter, will we put the engine together? We actually don't know that. It could turn out that the engine just isn't any good and we have to do something else with it, which I hope is not the case. I think rebuilding this engine is meaningful. I think getting it in the car and getting the car moving is an interesting milestone. And even if down the road we decide we want to do something completely different, we end up pulling this engine out and putting something else in it, I still think it's worth rebuilding this one because of the educational experience And so that's the plan at this point. I do very much want to know what you think we should be doing. Am I making the right move here? Not too late to completely change course. I have, by the way, looked at 351s. They're available all over the place, and that would be an interesting swap. Cobras are relatively cheap. Coyotes are, more expensive, but still achievable. I'm not, at this point, all that overzealous about cutting out the transmission tunnel or swapping out the front suspension, but I'm not opposed to it either. So anyway, let me know what you think. What's the right thing to do here? I'll check in with you as soon as we have more information on the engine and let you know where we're going next.